Evan Douglas had grown accustomed to the looks by now. The subtle flaring of nasal slits when he entered a room, the polite chittering that inevitably meant some variation of how adorable they sent a human. The way the Volnar delegation's triple-jointed appendages would tap restlessly on the crystal table surface, as if to say, "Let's get this over with." Today's diplomatic reception was no different. The Grand Embassy of the Seven Systems Alliance, a towering structure of impossible geometries in downtown Chicago, hummed with activity as representatives from 24 species mingled beneath floating chandeliers of bioluminescent Trellian squid. "Ambassador Douglas," a melodious voice trilled from behind. "How delightful to see Earth sending its most persistent representative." Evan turned to face Ambassador Kelzara, her iridescent scales shifting from azure to violet as she approached. The Mazic diplomat stood nearly 7 feet tall, her movements fluid like water over polished stone. "Ambassador Kelzara," Evan replied with a practiced smile. "Always a pleasure. I trust the Mazic Consortium found our proposal on the Jupiter mining rights adequate." Her head tilted at a precise 30-degree angle, the Mazic equivalent of a dismissive eye roll. "Adequate is generous, Ambassador. Your species continues to rely on outdated extraction methodologies. We've improved upon the Centaurian techniques by 47.3%. Humans simply lack the refinement capacity to compete." And there it was. The same conversation he'd had 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways, with 1,000 different species. Humans. The galactic afterthought. The cosmic curiosity. The evolutionary footnote. Perhaps. Evan conceded with a slight bow. "Though I believe our delegation has prepared some alternative approaches worth considering." Kelzara's mouth formed the distinctive M shape that humans had learned to interpret as patronizing amusement. "Of course, the human imperative, always trying to, what is your expression, reinvent the circle." "Wheel," Evan corrected automatically. "And sometimes reinvention is exactly what's needed." She glided away with a polite chirp, leaving Evan to nurse his synthahole in relative solitude. From across the vast chamber, he caught the eye of Dr. Madison Park, Earth's lead xenoanthropologist, who gave him a barely perceptible nod before returning to her conversation with a gelatinous Korak philosopher. His comm unit vibrated subtly against his wrist. "Secure channel established. Proceed to lower atrium. Authentication. Prometheus Alpha." Evan drained his drink, smoothed the front of his formal diplomatic attire, deliberately old-fashioned compared to the self-adjusting garments worn by most other species, and made his way toward the curved staircase leading to the lower levels. The lower atrium bustled with the embassy's service staff, a mix of automated systems and junior representatives from across the galaxy. Here, away from the pageantry of the main reception, the real work of interstellar diplomacy happened. Trade agreements were sketched on napkins, cultural exchanges proposed over shared meals, technological partnerships formed in hushed tones. A slender man with dark hair and a meticulously trimmed beard waved Evan over to a small table, partially obscured by an enormous Trellian fern. Director Marcus Webb of Earth Intelligence looked entirely too comfortable for someone technically not invited to the evening's proceedings. "Please tell me you have something," Evan said, sliding into the seat opposite Marcus. "The Mazic just patted me on the head again, figuratively speaking, and the Volnar delegation hasn't even acknowledged our existence." Marcus smiled thinly. "The Galactic Classification Committee's preliminary report was leaked an hour ago." Evan's stomach tightened. and humanity remains categorized as a Class 3 civilization. They're recommending continued restricted access to the Advanced Technology Registry. God damn it, Evan hissed, keeping his voice low. On what grounds this time? The usual, limited cognitive processing capacity, insufficient collective consciousness cohesion, and my personal favorite, creativity deficit syndrome. Marcus handed over a small crystalline data node. They genuinely believe we can't innovate, only imitate. Evan pocketed the node. The Jupiter mining rights. Grand Minister Volnar F. Ran, a towering figure with crystalline skin that refracted light into mesmerizing patterns, raised his appendages for silence.
Esteemed colleagues,
The Grand Minister's voice resonated without apparent amplification. We gather at a momentous time. The Seven Systems Alliance has maintained peace and prosperity for 100 cycles. Tomorrow we showcase the fruits of our collaborative innovation, each species building upon the foundations laid by others, each contributing according to their evolutionary gifts. His crystalline gaze swept the room before settling, briefly but unmistakably, on the human delegation. Some among us, he continued, still struggle to understand their place in our grand cosmic tapestry, still grasp for responsibilities beyond their natural capacities. But the classification system exists not to limit, but to guide each species toward their optimal contribution. Evan felt the weight of the data nodes in his pocket, felt the eyes of the gallery upon him, felt the accumulated frustration of decades of human dismissal burning in his chest. The Grand Minister's final words seemed directed specifically at him. Tomorrow's showcase will remind us all of what true innovation looks like. As the reception dissolved into smaller conversations, Evan caught Madison's eye across the chamber. She raised an eyebrow in silent question. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. It was time to show the galaxy what humans could really do. Evan's secure apartment overlooking Lake Michigan was one of the few places in Chicago not subject to Alliance surveillance protocols. The diplomatic quarters' human residences had been deemed too simplistic to warrant monitoring. Just another example of galactic condescension that occasionally worked in humanity's favor. Madison Park sat cross-legged on his living room floor, surrounded by holographic projections of Project Prometheus data. Her fingers danced through streams of code with practiced precision. The timing couldn't be better, she said without looking up. The showcase gives us a legitimate reason to be in the same room as all 24 classification committee representatives. Marcus Webb stood by the window, his reflection ghostly against the night skyline, and a legitimate excuse when they ask how we created something they couldn't possibly anticipate. Evan studied the three-dimensional blueprint, rotating above Madison's shoulder. They'll say we stole it. They always do, Madison replied, but not this time. The innovation protocol is uniquely human, built on cognitive architecture no other species possesses. They'll tear it apart molecule by molecule, and they'll find only human fingerprints. A gentle chime interrupted them. The embassy's daily intelligence briefing. Evan activated the display with a gesture. The holographic face of Ambassador Kelzara appeared, her scales shifting nervously between colors. Reports from the Cygnus Rift suggest unusual stellar activity. The Alliance Science Directorate is monitoring the situation. All scheduled transport through sectors 17 through 22 will continue without disruption. There is no cause for concern. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's the third non-concerning announcement about the Cygnus Rift this week. Madison nodded, pulling up astronomical data alongside her Prometheus work. The rift's been unstable for months. The Volnar dismissed our analysis that suggested precautionary measures. Because humans couldn't possibly understand astrophysics better than Class 1s, Evan muttered. The briefing continued with mundane diplomatic announcements. Evan turned it off, with a sharp gesture. "If something's happening at the rift, it could affect our timeline," he said. Marcus shook his head. "Or provide the perfect backdrop. Class 1s have been managing rift technology for centuries. If they're downplaying concerns, it's because they're confident in their containment protocols." Madison looked up, her expression thoughtful. "But what if they're wrong? What if their refined approach doesn't work this time?" A slow smile spread across Evan's face. "Then perhaps they'll need something innovative." The pre-showcase reception the following evening buzzed with unusual tension. Representatives clustered in species-specific groups, conversations hushed and urgent. Evan circulated carefully, gathering fragments of information. "Fluctuations unlike anything in our records," a Trellian physicist whispered to her colleague. "Transportation grid through sectors 17 Ms 29, now compromised," a Kershada official chirped. When Evan approached a group of Mazig diplomats, their conversation abruptly shifted to pleasantries about Earth cuisine. Ambassador Kelzada greeted him with practiced diplomacy. "Ambassador Douglas, how fortuitous. I was just explaining to my colleagues the fascinating human tradition of fermenting grape juice." Evan smiled. "Perhaps later you can explain the fascinating Mazig tradition of deflection when worried about something." Her scales flashed crimson before settling into a controlled blue-green pattern. "I assure you the Alliance has everything well in hand." "The Cygnus Rift situation, you mean?" Evan kept his tone casual, watching her tertiary eye membranes flutter. "A subtle sign of Mazig stress, a minor anomaly," she replied. "The Volner have managed the rift gates for 300 years. Their refinements to the original Zealot stabilization technology are unparalleled." "Refinements," Evan repeated. "But not innovations." Before Kelzara could respond, a ripple of tension swept through the reception hall. Grand Minister Volner Ethron had entered, accompanied by the rarely seen Zealot representative. Their environmental suit seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a person-shaped void moving through the crowd. The Grand Minister signaled for attention, his crystalline form pulsing with subdued patterns. "Esteemed colleagues, tomorrow's innovation showcase will proceed as scheduled. However, representatives from Class 1 and 2 civilizations are requested to attend a private briefing regarding the Cygnus Rift situation immediately following this reception." Evan noticed several species exchange worried glances. The Volner were not known for altering plans without significant cause. Class 3 representatives are welcome to continue enjoying refreshments until the standard conclusion time, the Grand Minister added, almost as an afterthought. And there it was. The dismissal wrapped in courtesy that humans had come to expect. Evan caught Madison's eye across the room, giving her the signal they'd arranged. She nodded minutely before approaching a Korak scientist engaged in conversation with the Zealot. Evan made his way to Marcus, who stood near a display of Trellian artwork. "They're excluding us from the Rift briefing," Evan muttered. "As expected," Marcus replied. "Madison's making the connection with the Korak physics team now. We'll have the real Rift data within the hour, and the prototype in position. Dr. Winston has it secured in the Human Sciences Annex. Officially, we're presenting a modest improvement to agricultural irrigation systems." Evan allowed himself a grim smile. "Let's hope we don't need to use it before the showcase." "That would spoil the dramatic reveal," Marcus said, with uncharacteristic lightness. Evan studied his oldest friend. "We're risking everything on this, not just our careers. Earth has been waiting a century for a seat at the real table, Evan. Every human who's gritted their teeth through another patronizing explanation of why we're not quite ready for full Alliance participation has been waiting for this moment." As the reception wound down, Madison approached them, her expression controlled, but her eyes bright with urgency. The rift situation is worse than they're admitting, she whispered. The Korak models predict a cascade failure within 36 hours. The containment protocols are failing. Marcus frowned. That changes things. The showcase may not happen at all if they can't stabilize the rift, Madison finished. But here's the interesting part. Their solution is to apply the same Volnar stabilization technique with increased power. They're trying to force the same approach to work rather than developing a new one. Evan processed this information quickly. Because they can't imagine a different approach. Precisely. They can only refine what already exists, not create something new. Madison's eyes gleamed. The Prometheus protocol could theoretically address the rift instability. It was designed for energy pattern recognition and novel reconfiguration. You're talking about field testing unproven technology on an interstellar transportation nexus, Marcus cautioned. If it fails, if the rift collapses, billions of lives across 17 systems are at risk, Madison countered. And based on the data I just saw, the Volnar approach has less than a 20% chance of success. Evan straightened his formal attire. Decision made. Get the prototype ready for transport. I'll speak with the Grand Minister. They won't listen, Marcus warned. Not at first, Evan agreed. But they will when their options run out. The Class 1 and 2 briefing was well underway when Evan entered the restricted chamber. Conversations halted abruptly. 24 different species turning to stare at the human intruder. Ambassador Douglas, the Grand Minister's voice, resonated with barely controlled irritation. This briefing is restricted to classifications 1 and 2. Yes, I'm aware. Evan moved to the center of the chamber with more confidence than he felt. I'm also aware that the Cygnus Rift is experiencing cascading quantum destabilization that your current protocols cannot contain. A murmur rippled through the assembled representatives. The zealot delegate's void-like form seemed to pulse with interest. This is highly irregular, Ambassador Kelzara protested. The human has no authorization. The human, Evan interrupted, has a solution your classification system hasn't considered. The Grand Minister's crystalline surface rippled with patterns Evan couldn't interpret. After a moment, he spoke. Proceed, Ambassador. But be aware that spreading misinformation during a crisis carries severe diplomatic consequences. Evan activated the holographic display embedded in his diplomatic credentials. A three-dimensional model of the Cygnus Rift appeared, alongside the energy signature Madison had prepared. Your stabilization approach treats the rift as a structural problem, applying counter-resonance fields to dampen fluctuations. Evan manipulated the display to highlight key areas. But this isn't a structural problem. It's a pattern recognition challenge. The Korak chief scientist's gelatinous form quivered forward. Explain. The human delegation requests permission to deploy an alternative technology at the rift edge, one designed specifically for quantum pattern adaptation. Impossible, the Grand Minister stated flatly. No Class 3 civilization possesses such technology. Evan smiled. That's the problem with your classification system, Minister. It doesn't account for something truly new. The chamber erupted in overlapping vocalizations as Madison and Dr. Winston entered, pushing a hovering platform bearing what appeared to be an unremarkable metallic sphere. The Grand Minister raised his appendages for silence. When he spoke again, his voice carried a dangerous edge. You propose to address a crisis affecting billions with untested human technology. I propose, Evan replied steadily, to demonstrate why your understanding of human capabilities requires immediate revision. He turned to Madison and nodded. Dr. Park, initiate the Prometheus protocol. Madison pressed her palm against the sphere's surface. It hummed to life, unfolding into an intricate lattice of light and matter that no Alliance species had ever seen before. The Prometheus device pulsed with an internal light that seemed to both exist and not exist simultaneously. A quantum superposition made visible. as it unfolded into increasingly complex geometric patterns. Even Dr. Winston looked surprised at its elegant transformation. "What is this?" The Grand Minister's crystalline form flickered with patterns that human xenolinguists had categorized as indicating extreme agitation. Madison stepped forward. "The Prometheus Protocol is a quantum adaptive system capable of recognizing and responding to novel energy patterns without predetermined parameters." "Impossible," a Volnar scientist declared, multiple appendages gesturing in dismissal. "Energy manipulation requires established paradigms. For your species, perhaps." Madison's voice remained calm, professional. "The human brain evolved for creative problem-solving, to recognize and generate patterns never before encountered." The device continued its metamorphosis, elements shifting into configurations that had several alien scientists moving closer despite themselves. The zealot representative's void-like form trembled, the first emotional reaction Evan had ever witnessed from their reclusive species. Ambassador Kelzara's scales shifted rapidly through colors. "You claim this device can stabilize the rift using creativity. We claim it can recognize the rift's unique energy signature as a pattern," Evan clarified, "and generate a complementary counter-pattern without relying on pre-existing templates." The Korak chief scientist's gelatinous form rippled forward. "The rift destabilizes precisely because it generates unpredictable quantum fluctuations that defy template-based solutions." "Exactly," Madison agreed, "which is why the Volnar approach is failing. You're trying to force the rift into known parameters instead of adapting to its actual behavior." The Grand Minister's voice cut through the rising murmurs. "This discussion is academic. The Cygnus Rift requires immediate action by proven means. Your proven means have a 17% chance of success," Evan countered, projecting the Korak's own data into the center of the chamber. "Our solution offers substantially better odds." A tense silence fell. The Grand Minister conferred briefly with the zealot representative, their communication occurring through means imperceptible to others. "Very well," the Grand Minister finally pronounced. "The human delegation may deploy their device alongside our established protocols. When both fail, at least the Classification Committee will have empirical evidence of human limitations." The observation deck aboard the Volnar flagship Crystalline Harmony offered a panoramic view of the Cygnus Rift, a vast, shimmering tier in the fabric of space that served as the primary transportation corridor between 7 major systems. What should have been a stable, controlled phenomenon now writhed with tendrils of chaotic energy that lashed out at the containment field generators positioned around its perimeter. Representatives from all 24 species crowded the deck, diplomatic hierarchies temporarily suspended in the face of potential catastrophe. Evan stood between Madison and Marcus, watching as the Volnar engineers activated their enhanced stabilization fields. "Containment at 28% and falling," announced the Volnar chief engineer, his crystalline limbs moving with precision across control surfaces, diverting additional power. The massive Volnar stabilizers, refined over centuries from original Zealot designs, pulsed with energy. The rift's chaotic tendrils retreated momentarily before surging back with greater intensity. "Containment at 17%, the engineer reported, his voice now containing harmonics that Evan recognized as distress. "The field cannot compensate for the novel fluctuation patterns." The Grand Minister turned to Evan. "Deploy your device, Ambassador, though I warn you that interference with Volnar operations carries severe diplomatic consequences." Evan nodded to Madison, who activated her control panel. On the main view screen, a small transport pod carrying the Prometheus device approached the rift's edge. "What exactly will your device do?" Ambassador Kelzara asked, her voice lacking its usual condescension. "It will observe," Madison replied. "Then it will create." The Prometheus device activated as it entered the rift's outer boundary, Its complex geometric configuration began shifting, responding to the rift's energy patterns in ways that had the alien scientists exchanging confused glances.
Oh, it's adapting!
Whispered a Trellian physicist, without programmed parameters. Impossible, a Volnar scientist repeated, though with less certainty. The Prometheus device pulsed once, twice, then projected an energy field unlike anything the Alliance had catalogued before. The field didn't fight against the rift's chaotic tendrils. Instead, it engaged with them, dancing in counterpoint, redirecting rather than opposing. Containment rising, the shocked Volnar engineer reported. 34%, 47%. The observation deck fell silent as they watched the human device perform what the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy had deemed impossible. The Prometheus field continued to adapt, each pulse refining its approach based on the rift's response, a conversation between energies rather than a battle. 63%, 79%. The zealot representative glided to Evan's side. When they spoke, their voice was a whisper that somehow reached his ears alone. "You've done what we could not," the zealot said, their words translated through Evan's diplomatic implant, created rather than refined. Containment at 92% and stabilizing, the engineer announced. The rift patterns are harmonizing with the human field. Madison's hands moved across her control panel, making minute adjustments. The Prometheus protocol doesn't force the rift into predetermined parameters. It recognizes the rift's inherent patterns and creates complementary ones in real time. Dr. Winston stepped forward. "If your engineers would allow it, we can establish a permanent stabilization matrix by integrating aspects of your technology with ours." The Grand Minister's crystalline form had gone utterly still, a sign of profound shock in Volnar physiology. "You suggest collaboration. That's what humans do," Evan said. "We don't just copy or refine. We see connections others miss and create something new from the combination." The observation deck erupted into chaotic discussions as representatives processed what they were witnessing. The Korak scientists clustered around Madison, appendages waving in excitement as they bombarded her with questions. The Trellian delegation conferred urgently among themselves, occasionally casting looks of what appeared to be awe toward the humans. Ambassador Kelzara approached Evan. Her scales settled into a deep violet hue he had never seen before. "The classification committee will require an emergency session," she said, her voice carefully neutral.
I imagine they will,
Evan replied.
You concealed this capability. We tried to show you. You weren't looking.
Her tertiary eye membranes fluttered.
How many other innovations
has humanity developed? Evan smiled.
That would depend on whether you're finally prepared to see them.
The Alliance Council chamber had never hosted an emergency session outside its regular convening schedule in its 300-year history. Yet here they were, representatives of all 24 species, arranged not in their usual hierarchical rings, but in a single circle, a temporary arrangement necessitated by the urgency of the situation. The Prometheus device sat on a pedestal at the center, now inactive, but no less disruptive for its silence. The Grand Minister called the session to order, his crystalline form still exhibiting patterns of uncertainty. The events at the Cygnus Rift necessitate immediate reconsideration of established Alliance protocols, he began. The human delegation has demonstrated technology that challenges certain foundational assumptions. Evan noticed several Class 1 representatives shifting uncomfortably. The Zealot delegate remained utterly still, their void-like form revealing nothing. The Mazic representative rose. Let us speak plainly. The humans have hidden advanced technology from the Alliance, violating transparency protocols. With respect, Marcus countered immediately. Transparent sharing of innovation depends upon recognition that innovation exists. Earth has submitted 273 technology proposals over the past 50 years. All were dismissed as derivative or impossible. The Kershara representative's feathers ruffled in agitation. The classification system exists for a reason. Cognitive evaluation metrics clearly indicate that you've been measuring the wrong things, Madison interrupted. You've evaluated species based on their ability to refine existing knowledge, not their capacity to create genuinely new approaches. The Korak chief scientist's form rippled thoughtfully. The Prometheus device operates on principles our science considered theoretically impossible. We must acknowledge this represents true innovation. A low murmur spread through the chamber as the implications sank in. The Trellian Prime speaker rose slowly. If humans possess this capacity for genuine creation rather than mere refinement, she said, her melodious voice carrying clearly, then the entire classification system requires re-evaluation. The Grand Minister's crystalline form pulsed with complex patterns. The Classification Committee will convene a special session to review all relevant data. Until then, the human delegation's security clearance will be provisionally elevated to allow further demonstration of this capability. It wasn't a reclassification Evan knew, not yet, but it was the first crack in a system that had kept humanity marginalized for generations. Ambassador Kelzara approached him as the session adjourned into chaotic conversation clusters. I've been assigned as liaison to evaluate your species' other innovations, she said, her scales shifting through thoughtful blue-green patterns. The committee is curious about what else we might have overlooked. Evan smiled. We have quite a catalog to show you. How? She asked, the question bursting forth as if she couldn't contain it. How does your species create what has never existed before? Evan considered how to explain something so fundamental to human experience, yet apparently so alien to the rest of the galaxy. We tell stories, he said, finally. We imagine what could be, instead of only what is, and then we build it. Her scales shifted to a color he had never seen before, a shade without classification in the diplomatic manuals. I believe, she said carefully, I have much to learn about humans. Across the chamber, the Grand Minister conferred with the Zealot representative, both occasionally glancing toward the human delegation. The Galactic Order had maintained its hierarchy for centuries through a classification system that everyone accepted as natural law. Now, they would have to imagine something new. The Provisional Classification Enhancement Committee, hastily formed in the 3 days since the Cygnus Rift crisis, convened in the smallest of the Alliance Council's chambers. Evan found the setting telling. The Alliance wanted to contain the political fallout as much as they had needed to contain the rift itself. Grand Minister Volnar Ethran presided over the 12-member committee, 3 representatives each from Class 1 and 2 civilizations, 4 neutral arbiters from the Galactic Academic Consortium, and 2 human representatives, Evan and Madison. Let the record show this is a fact-finding body only. The Grand Minister began, his crystalline form radiating patterns of careful neutrality. The classification system has maintained peace and prosperity for 3 centuries. Any modifications must be approached with appropriate caution. Madison leaned close to Evan. Translation. They're terrified, she whispered. They should be, he murmured back. The Korak representative's gelatinous form rippled with agitation. We cannot ignore empirical evidence. The human innovation at the Rift demonstrated cognitive capabilities outside our established metrics. A single instance is hardly sufficient to overturn centuries of scientific consensus, countered a Volnar scientist. Perhaps the humans simply discovered an anomalous phenomenon through trial and error. Evan suppressed a smile. The dismissal was so predictable, he'd included it in his briefing notes. With respect, he said, activating a hollow projection in the center of the chamber, we've prepared a catalog of 112 human innovations developed independently over the past 50 years. Each was previously submitted to the Alliance, and categorized as either derivative or impractical. The projection displayed scrolling technical specifications, prototype designs, and implementation scenarios. Several committee members leaned forward, appendages and sensory organs focused on the data. The Prometheus protocol was simply the most dramatic example, Madison added, but there are others equally transformative in their domains: cross-dimensional agriculture, non-linear computational architecture, empathic medicine. Why would humans conceal such capabilities? The Trellian representative's feathery tendrils waved in suspicious patterns. "We didn't conceal them," Evan replied. "You weren't looking for what you couldn't recognize." The debate continued for hours, moving from skepticism to reluctant acknowledgement as the evidence mounted. When the session finally adjourned, Evan knew the political terrain had shifted irrevocably. The question was no longer whether humans possessed unique creative capabilities, but what this meant for the galactic order. The Mazik Embassy's private reception garden featured elaborate water sculptures that responded to the emotional states of nearby beings. As Evan entered, the liquid formations twisted into jagged, anxious shapes. Ambassador Kelzara waited beside a reflecting pool, her scales cycling through thoughtful hues. 3 other representatives stood with her: the avian Kershara diplomat, a senior Trellian minister, and the amphibious Duraxian trade envoy. Ambassador Douglas, Kelzara greeted him. "Thank you for agreeing to this unofficial conversation." Evan nodded politely. "I assumed it was only a matter of time before the Class 2s formed a coalition." The Kershara representative's head crest flared in surprise. "You anticipated this meeting." "Humans understand power dynamics," Evan replied. "The Class 1s are scrambling to maintain control. The Class 3s lack political leverage to capitalize on the situation. That leaves the Class 2s in a unique position to broker whatever comes next." The Duraxian trade envoy burbled appreciatively. "Perhaps we've underestimated human strategic thinking as well." "You've underestimated many things," Evan said. Ambassador Kelzara gestured toward a private alcove where they could speak without monitoring. Once seated, her manner shifted from diplomatic formality to direct engagement. "The classification committee is deadlocked," she said. "The Volner and Korak are blocking all proposals for human reclassification, while the Zealot have abstained from voting entirely." "Unsurprising," Evan replied. "A reclassification of humanity would undermine the fundamental premise of their authority." The Trellian minister leaned forward. "We propose an alternative: the formation of a new category altogether, one that recognizes innovative capacity as distinct from refinement capability." Evan kept his expression neutral, though his pulse quickened. "And which species would qualify for this category?" "Initially, only humans," the Kershara diplomat admitted, "though provisions would exist for evaluation of other species, with appropriate access to technology registries, research facilities, and trading rights," added the Duraxian. Ambassador Kelzara's scales settled into the deep violet hue Evan had seen only once before, at the Cygnus Rift. "We would support this proposal in exchange for preferential access to human innovation protocols." And there it was, the real purpose of the meeting. Not just acknowledgement of human capabilities, but access to them. "An interesting proposal," Evan said carefully, "though I wonder what the Class 1s would think of such an arrangement." "The Class 1s need not know until the proposal is formally presented," the Kershara diplomat suggested, feathers ruffling slightly. Evan smiled. "I believe humanity would be open to collaboration, provided it's based on mutual respect rather than exploitation." The water sculptures in the garden shifted into more harmonious patterns as they worked through the details of a potential alliance. Marcus Webb was waiting when Evan returned to the human diplomatic quarters. "The Volner have requested a private meeting," he said without preamble. Just you and the Grand Minister. No staff, no records. Evan raised an eyebrow.
When? Tonight. And there's more.
Marcus handed him a secure data node. Our intelligence team intercepted communications between the Volnar and 3 other Class 1 species. They're concerned about more than just the classification system. Evan reviewed the data, his expression growing serious. They're afraid of what else we might create. With good reason, Madison added. Entering the room, the Prometheus Protocol has applications far beyond rift stabilization. They've finally realized that a species capable of true innovation is inherently unpredictable. Evan considered this, and unpredictability threatens a system built on carefully managed advancement. Exactly, Madison confirmed. Our latest analysis suggests they're preparing contingency measures, including possible restrictions on human expansion beyond our current colonial territories. Containment, Marcus said grimly. Evan paced the room, weighing options. The Class 2s are offering an alliance. They want access to our innovation capabilities in exchange for political support. A dangerous game, Marcus warned. If we align with the Class 2s, the Class 1s might view it as a direct challenge to their authority. And if we align with the Class 1s, Madison asked, they'll try to control and limit our innovations. Evan replied, everything filtered through their approval processes, ostensibly for safety, but actually for control. Marcus's expression hardened.
There's another possibility.
The Zealot have requested a separate meeting tomorrow before the full Alliance Council session.
The Zealot? Madison looked genuinely surprised.
They never engaged directly with Class 3s.
Until now, Evan said.
What did they say?
Only that they wished to discuss mutual interests in creativity.
Marcus shrugged. Whatever that means. Evan thought back to the Zealot representative's whispered words at the rift. You've done what we could not, created rather than refined. What had they meant? Accept both meetings, he decided. The Volnar tonight, the Zealot tomorrow, and prepare contingency plans for any scenario.
Alliance with Class 1s, Class 2s, or independent action.
Madison nodded. And the Prometheus Protocol variants. Keep them secure but ready for demonstration. We may need to remind certain parties what humanity is capable of. The Grand Minister's private meditation chamber was a marvel of crystalline architecture,
with walls that shifted and realigned in response to thought patterns.
As Evan entered, the chamber adjusted to accommodate human perceptual needs, moderating light frequencies and sound resonances. Grand Minister Volnar Ithran waited in the center, his crystalline form pulsing with restrained energy. Ambassador Douglas, he greeted, his voice modulated to precise diplomatic frequencies. Thank you for agreeing to this private consultation. Minister, Evan acknowledged. These are unprecedented times. Indeed, the Grand Minister's form shifted, creating a seating arrangement appropriate for human physiology. The Cygnus Rift incident has created complications. You mean it revealed truths your classification system wasn't designed to accommodate? The crystalline patterns across the minister's form flickered briefly. The classification system has maintained peace for centuries, Ambassador. It provides order, stability, predictable advancement. For some, Evan noted. For all, the minister insisted. Even Class 3 civilizations benefit from controlled technological distribution. History is replete with examples of species who advanced too quickly and destroyed themselves. Or perhaps that's just the narrative that justifies your control. The minister was silent for a moment, his crystalline patterns shifting into more complex configurations. You've been approached by the Class 2s. Not a question. Evan kept his expression neutral. News travels quickly. Their proposal is short-sighted. A new classification would fracture the alliance. Multiple competing interests would emerge. Centuries of stability ended. And your alternative, the Grand Minister's form reconfigured slightly. A compromise. Humanity remains technically within Classification 3, but with special dispensation for innovation oversight. A dedicated council to evaluate human creations with expedited approval processes. Under Volner supervision, Evan guessed. Under Alliance supervision, the minister corrected, with appropriate safeguards. Safeguards against what, exactly? The crystalline patterns pulsed once, sharply. Against the unknown, Ambassador. Innovation without oversight is inherently dangerous. Innovation without oversight is how humanity survived, while waiting for the Alliance to acknowledge our capabilities. Evan countered. We've managed our creativity responsibly. Thus far, the minister noted. But what happens when human innovation extends beyond energy manipulation? When it touches interspecies governance, cultural sovereignty, the fundamental structures of galactic society? Evan leaned forward. That's what truly concerns you, isn't it? Not that we might destroy ourselves, but that we might change the order you've established. The Grand Minister's form stilled completely, a sign of intense focus in Volner physiology. Consider our offer carefully, Ambassador, he said finally. The Class 2s seek to use human innovation for their own advancement. We seek to integrate it safely into existing structures. I'll take your proposal to Earth's leadership, Evan replied diplomatically. Though I should mention we have other meetings scheduled before tomorrow's council session. The Zealot, the minister said, confirming Evan's suspicion that nothing in the Alliance happened without Volner knowledge. Be cautious, Ambassador. The Zealot agenda is complex. As Evan left the chamber, he couldn't help but feel the political landscape shifting beneath his feet. The Grand Minister's warning about the Zealot seemed genuine, but was it concern for humanity's welfare, or fear of what an alliance between humans and the mysterious Zealot might mean? Tomorrow's meeting would reveal much, and after that, the full council session, where humanity's place in the galactic order would be decided once and for all. Evan activated his secure communicator. Marcus, Madison, gather the team. We need to prepare for every possibility. The Zealot private meeting chamber defied conventional spatial understanding. As Evan entered alone, both Madison and Marcus had been politely but firmly excluded. He found himself in what appeared to be an endless void, punctuated by occasional points of light. That the Zealot private meeting chamber defied conventional spatial understanding. The environment should have been disorienting, even terrifying, yet he felt strangely at ease. The Zealot representative materialized, or perhaps had been there all along, simply revealing themselves. Without their environmental suit, the Zealot appeared as a shifting constellation of luminous patterns. Ambassador Douglas. The voice seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere. Thank you for coming alone. You requested privacy, Evan replied. Though I admit I'm curious why. The Zealot's form rippled in what might have been amusement, because what I must share with you cannot be filtered through others' perceptions. It must be directly experienced. Before Evan could respond, the void around them transformed. He found himself standing in what appeared to be ancient Earth, humans in primitive clothing, creating the first cave paintings. The scene shifted rapidly. The invention of the wheel, the first written languages, the Renaissance, the digital revolution, each moment capturing, humans creating something from nothing but imagination. What is this? Evan asked, watching as centuries of human innovation flashed around him. Context, the Zealot replied. Something the classification system deliberately obscures. The scene shifted again, now showing various alien civilizations, the Volner, perfecting crystalline technologies, the Mazik, refining biotechnology, the Korak, optimizing existing knowledge through their collective consciousness. Every species in the Alliance, except one, follows the same pattern. The Zealot continued. They excel at refinement, taking existing concepts and improving them incrementally. It is valuable, necessary work, but not innovation, Evan said. No, not creation. The Zealot's form pulsed, except for two species. The Void transformed again. Now Evan saw scenes he couldn't possibly recognize. Alien beings with forms similar to the Zealot, creating technologies and art, unlike anything humanity had encountered. Your people, Evan guessed. Yes, we were once as you are now, creators, innovators, dreamers. The Zealot's tone carried something like nostalgic sorrow. Until we weren't. What happened? We evolved. The scene shifted to show the Zealot civilization advancing, their physical forms becoming increasingly energy-based, or perhaps devolved. We achieved perfect efficiency, perfect harmony with natural laws. We no longer needed to imagine alternatives, because we had optimized our existence. You lost your creativity, Evan realized. Yes, it happened so gradually we barely noticed, until it was gone. Like a language no longer spoken, the neural pathways for true creation atrophied. We became the ultimate refiners, but could no longer innovate. The Void returned to its original state, points of light surrounding them. The Volner and others believe the classification system exists to protect developing species. The Zealot continued. In truth, it exists because we recognized what was happening across the galaxy, the same pattern repeating. Species evolve toward efficiency, toward refinement, and lose the spark of creation. Evan felt a chill, and humans are following a different evolutionary path, one we once traveled but abandoned. You value inefficiency, contradiction, even conflict, the fertile soil from which true creation springs. The Zealot's form brightened. You remain gloriously, vitally imperfect. Why tell me this now? Because the Alliance stands at a crossroads. The Volnar and other Class 1s fear what they don't understand, unpredictability of true creation. The Class 2s seek to exploit what they envy but cannot replicate. The Zealot moved closer. We offer a third path, which is partnership, not based on classification or hierarchy, but on complementary capabilities, your creativity, balanced by our refinement. And what would this partnership entail? The Zealot's form shimmered. The transmission of a gift, the last true creation of our civilization before we lost the capacity. A template for understanding creativity itself. I don't understand. You will. The Zealot's form expanded, enveloping Evan in luminous patterns that seemed to penetrate his consciousness. He gasped as understanding flooded through him. Not technical specifications or scientific formulas, but something more fundamental, the neurological and philosophical underpinnings of creativity itself, crystallized into a form that could be shared. When the light receded, Evan stood trembling, his mind racing with implications. This is why you've remained neutral, he whispered. You've been watching, waiting for a species capable of receiving this. Yes, the Zealot confirmed. The template cannot be refined, only created anew by each species that would use it. We could preserve it, but not evolve it. For that, we need creators. What am I supposed to do with this? That, the Zealot replied. is entirely up to you. That is the point of creation, after all. The Alliance Council chamber buzzed with tension as representatives from all 24 species assembled for the extraordinary session. The formal setting, with its rigid hierarchical arrangement, seemed suddenly obsolete, a relic of an understanding that no longer applied. Evan took his place at the center of the chamber, flanked by Madison and Marcus. The template the Zealot had shared hummed in his consciousness, not as information, but as perspective, a way of seeing connections that had always been there, but never recognized. The Grand Minister called the session to order. Representatives of the Alliance, we convene to address the matter of human classification. In light of recent events, multiple proposals have been submitted for consideration. Evan stepped forward. If I may, Minister, I believe there's an alternative worth considering. Before we proceed, a murmur ran through the assembly. The Grand Minister's crystalline form flickered with reluctance before he nodded. Proceed, Ambassador. The classification system, Evan began, was designed to categorize species according to their capabilities. Class 1s refine with unparalleled precision. Class 2s apply with remarkable adaptability. Class 3s implement with necessary functionality. He paused, looking around the chamber, making eye contact with representatives from each species. But this system fails to recognize something fundamental. These capabilities aren't hierarchical. They're complementary. The chamber grew still as Evan activated a holographic display. Unlike previous presentations of technology or data, this showed something more abstract, a representation of the template, visualized as interconnected patterns of light that somehow evoked both mathematical precision and artistic beauty. This is the creative constant, Evan said, giving name to what the Zealot had shared. Not a technology, but a framework for understanding how creation and refinement function as complementary forces, not just in technology, but in culture, governance, even consciousness itself. The Korak representative's gelatinous form pulsed forward. Explain. The Zealot discovered this principle millennia ago before their civilization evolved toward perfect refinement. Evan nodded toward the Zealot representative, who remained motionless. They recognized that creation without refinement leads to chaos, while refinement without creation leads to stagnation. Both are necessary for sustainable advancement. This is unorthodox, the Grand Minister stated. Though his crystalline patterns suggested fascination, creation is often unorthodox. Evan replied, that's rather the point. He manipulated the display, showing how the creative constant manifested differently across species, strongest in humans, latent in varying degrees in others, nearly absent in the most advanced refiners. I propose not a reclassification of humanity, but a reconceptualization of the Alliance itself, not as a hierarchy of capabilities, but as an ecosystem of complementary strengths. Ambassador Kelzara's scales shifted thoughtfully. You suggest dismantling a system that has maintained peace for centuries. I suggest evolving it, Evan corrected. Just as the Prometheus Protocol didn't fight the rift's chaotic energy, but engaged with it, we need not oppose the existing order, but transform it. Using the template's perspective, Evan outlined a new framework, a collaborative council, where species contributed according to their natural inclinations, without hierarchical distinction. Creation, refinement, application, and implementation, recognized as equally necessary phases in advancement. As he spoke, he noticed something remarkable. Representatives were engaging not just with his words, but with the visual representation of the template itself. The Volnar's crystalline forms pulsed in patterns, matching certain aspects. The Korak collective rippled in synchronized response to others. Even the Class 3 representatives leaned forward, recognizing elements that resonated with their own cognitive processes. The template doesn't just explain creativity, Madison whispered, noticing the same phenomenon. It creates a shared language for understanding it. When Evan finished, the chamber remained silent for several heartbeats. Then the zealot representative moved to the center, their void-like form pulsing with subtle light. "What Ambassador Douglas proposes," they said, their voice carrying unusual emotion, "is not merely a political reorganization, but a recognition of a deeper truth. The diversity of our cognitive approaches is not accidental but essential, an evolutionary balance that preserves both stability and growth." The Grand Minister's crystalline form had been still throughout, absorbing. When he finally spoke, his tone carried something new, uncertainty, yes, but also possibility. "This creative constant, you claim it exists across all species, in different proportions," Evan confirmed. "Even in the most advanced refiners, the capacity for creation remains dormant perhaps, but present. Just as humans can learn refinement despite our predisposition toward innovation. If this is true," the Trellian Prime Speaker said, "then the implications extend far beyond classification." "Yes," Evan agreed. "It suggests that what we've seen as separate evolutionary paths are actually phases in a larger cycle. The zealot didn't lose their creativity through some failure. They evolved beyond it, but in doing so recognized its essential value and preserved the template for a time when it would be needed again." He looked around the chamber. "Perhaps that's the ultimate innovation, not creating technologies or even systems, but understanding our place in a creative cycle that's larger than any single species." 3 months later, Evan stood on the observation deck of Earth's newly established Creative Sciences Academy. Below, representatives from 17 alliance species worked in collaborative teams, humans providing innovative frameworks that others refined, applied, and implemented with their own specialized capabilities. Madison joined him, data tablet in hand. "The Cygnus Rift stabilization is holding at 100%. The Volnar human joint team is applying the same principles to 3 other spatial anomalies. And the template integration," she smiled, "better than we anticipated. 7 species have shown increased creative capacity when working directly with humans. The Mazic in particular seem to be reawakening neural pathways they hadn't used in millennia." Evan nodded, watching as a human artist collaborated with a Volnar crystalline engineer, their disparate approaches merging to create something neither could have produced alone. "The zealot were right," he said quietly. "Creativity isn't just a human trait, it's a phase in a larger cycle. We just happen to be in that phase right now." "And when we evolve beyond it," Madison asked, "will we become like the zealot, perfect refiners without the spark of innovation?" "Perhaps," Evan admitted, "but now we understand the cycle. We can preserve the template, pass it forward to whatever species comes next. Maybe that's our true purpose in the galaxy, not just to create, but to ensure creation itself continues." Below them, a Korak scientist made an unexpected connection between human intuition and Trellian precision mechanics. A cheer went up from the collaborative team, the sound of something new entering the universe. Evan smiled. In the end, humanity's greatest innovation wasn't the Prometheus protocol or any other technology. It was helping the galaxy remember how to create, and in doing so, creating itself anew.